A world where human lives are bought and sold like cattle, one girl stands at the auction block, head bowed under the weight of 1,000 cruel stares. The villagers mock her, offering pennies and stale bread for damaged goods no one wants. But as hope fades and dignity crumbles, a mysterious hooded figure steps forward from the shadows with words that silence the crowd. "I will pay 1,000 gold coins." This single act of unimaginable generosity hides a dangerous truth. The stranger is no merchant but a royal with a desperate mission, and the girl is no common peasant but the living embodiment of a secret that could topple kingdoms. As they flee pursuers who will stop at nothing to silence them both, the medallion she wears against her skin grows warmer with each passing day. A physical link to a noble bloodline she never knew was hers, and to a mother who chose to give her up rather than watch her die. What happens when a girl raised in poverty discovers she was born to wear a crown? And what terrible price will be paid by those who stand with her against the man who murdered her parents and stole her birthright? The truth waits like a blade in the darkness, and blood, royal blood, will surely flow before justice can be claimed. The merciless sun beat down upon the village square, its relentless rays scorching the dirt beneath the wooden platform where they had just dragged her. The young woman stood trembling, her head bowed low, unwashed hair falling across her face like a protective veil. Her tattered dress, once perhaps a shade of blue, now hung in dirty rags around her thin frame, exposing patches of skin rubbed raw by rope bindings. Blood trickled from her split lip, a fresh wound from when she dared resist this morning. A crowd had gathered, their faces twisted with morbid curiosity and contempt. "Nobody will pay a single coin for this wretched thing," a red-faced butcher shouted, eliciting cruel laughter that rippled through the assembly. Children pointed while their mothers gossiped behind cupped hands. The stench of fresh sweat mingled with stale bread and kicked-up dust, making the air thick and suffocating. Compassion was nowhere to be found in this square. Only scorn hung in the air, as palpable as the summer heat. From the shadows of a nearby alleyway, a cloaked figure observed the proceedings with unsettling intensity. His hood was pulled low, concealing most of his face, yet his eyes caught what little sunlight penetrated the shadow, glinting with something that might have been anger or perhaps calculation. His fingers, too clean and unmarked for a common laborer, tightened around the edge of his cloak. The young woman felt his gaze upon her skin like a physical touch, sending an inexplicable chill down her spine despite the blistering heat. She dared not look up, but her shoulders hunched further, as if trying to make herself even smaller, more invisible. The stranger shifted his weight, and something metallic clinked softly beneath his cloak, a sound that went unnoticed by all save the girl, whose ears had grown accustomed to detecting the smallest warnings of approaching danger. "5 coppers for the wench," came the first mocking bid from a drunken farrier. "I'll give you 3 coppers and a moldy turnip," shouted another, his companions roaring with laughter as if he'd delivered the wittiest jest in the kingdom. The auctioneer, a rat-faced man with yellowed teeth, played to the crowd, pretending to consider these ridiculous offers with exaggerated gestures. "Do I hear 4 coppers? Anyone for 4? His voice carried the practiced cadence of a man who enjoyed others' humiliation, drawing out each syllable for maximum effect. The young woman's chest tightened until breathing became painful. This was not merely about being sold, it was about being stripped of the last shreds of her dignity before strange, hateful eyes. A single tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the dirt on her cheek before she hastily wiped it away. To cry would only give them more satisfaction. Her nails dug into her palms until tiny crescents of blood formed in her skin, pain to focus on, pain she could control, unlike everything else happening to her. "2 stale loaves and a chicken bone," someone else called out, and the square erupted in fresh peals of laughter. The girl's knees nearly buckled. The hunger in her stomach twisted viciously, reminding her it had been 3 days since her last proper meal. Even this mockery of a sale wouldn't fetch enough to feed her. Death might have been kinder than this spectacle, this public evisceration of whatever humanity they still permitted her to possess. The auctioneer raised his hands theatrically. "Come now, good people of Thornwick. Surely this girl is worth more than table scraps. She has all her teeth, strong enough arms for work, and might even clean up presentable if you're not too particular." His words carried a sickening undertone that made several men exchange knowing glances. The young woman's throat closed with fear as she realized what fate likely awaited her, a life far worse than the poverty she'd known before. Just as hope had completely abandoned her, a voice cut through the cacophony of jeers, calm, measured, and carrying an authority that instantly silenced the crowd. "I will pay 1,000 gold coins." The silence that followed was absolute, as if even the wind had paused to witness this moment. The auctioneer's mouth hung open, his next words forgotten. The young woman's head snapped up, her eyes widening in disbelief as she searched for the source of the voice. The hooded figure had stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, standing now in a shaft of sunlight that seemed to illuminate him alone. 1,000 gold coins? The auctioneer stammered, his theatrical confidence evaporating instantly. "Sir, perhaps you misheard the—" "You heard me correctly," the stranger interrupted, his accent refined yet unplaceable. 1,000 gold coins for the girl. Now. The crowd parted like water as he approached the platform. Whispers erupted, theories forming and dissolving just as quickly. Who would spend a king's ransom on a filthy peasant girl? What nobleman or merchant would carry such wealth while traveling through a humble village? The young woman felt her heart hammering against her ribs with such force she feared it might shatter bone. Her vision swam, darkness threatening at the edges. The stranger reached the platform and looked up at her directly for the first time. Though his face remained mostly hidden beneath his hood, she caught a glimpse of eyes that seemed to see through her, past the dirt and humiliation to something else, something she herself had forgotten existed. Not desire, not pity, but recognition. "Do you accept my offer?" he asked the auctioneer, though his gaze remained fixed on the girl. The rat-faced man nodded frantically, unable to believe his extraordinary fortune. "Of course, my lord, of course." As a weathered leather pouch heavy with gold changed hands, the crowd pressed closer, their expressions transformed from mockery to fascination. The same villagers who moments before had been jeering now looked at her with new eyes, as if she were suddenly precious, mysterious, worth something after all. This whiplash of treatment made her stomach turn. The hooded man extended his hand toward her, and she hesitated, trembling. His voice lowered so that only she could hear. "You need not fear me. Your chains end today." As her shaking fingers reached for his outstretched hand, the young woman couldn't possibly know that this incomprehensible moment, this stranger's inexplicable bid, would alter not only her fate but the destiny of an entire kingdom. Something shifted in the world's foundation as their hands met, though neither could have named it then. The villagers watched, holding their breath, sensing perhaps that they were witnessing something momentous, something that would be whispered about in taverns for years to come. Who was this man who would pay a fortune for a nobody? And what could he possibly want with her? Whispers followed them like persistent shadows through the narrow streets of the village. The girl's ears burned as fragments of shocked conversation reached her. 1,000 gold coins for that filth. And must be bewitched or mad. And worst of all, what disgusting purpose would he have for... She kept her eyes fixed on the muddy path beneath her bare feet, each step carrying her further from the auction block, but not from the shame that clung to her like a second skin. The hooded stranger maintained a deliberate distance as he guided her away from the square, close enough to signal his ownership to potential thieves eyeing his expensive purchase, yet far enough that she wouldn't feel his breath on her neck. This calculated space between them made her stomach twist with fresh anxiety. Was he merely waiting until they were truly alone before revealing his true intentions? Her fingers trembled uncontrollably at her sides, and she curled them into fists to hide the weakness. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. But the words rang hollow in her ears. Safety was a luxury she'd never known, certainly not something that could be purchased, even for 1,000 gold coins. Her throat constricted around unspoken questions. Why had he chosen her? What price would she truly pay for this intervention? The village's central well appeared ahead, where women clustered with their water jugs, falling silent as the odd pair approached. Their eyes tracked the girl with newfound curiosity, The same women who had previously looked through her as if she were invisible now studied her as if she were a puzzle to be solved. One woman, bolder than the rest, stepped forward with a water ladle extended, not toward the girl but toward the hooded man. "For your journey, sir," she offered with a curtsy deeper than her station warranted. As the stranger reached to accept the water, the sleeve of his cloak shifted, revealing the edge of something gleaming beneath, a metal bracer etched with unfamiliar symbols, polished to a shine that no common merchant would maintain. The girl's breath caught. The bracer disappeared as quickly as it had been exposed, but the woman at the well had seen it too. Her eyes widened slightly before she retreated, whispering urgently to her companions. The girl felt cold sweat beading along her spine despite the day's heat. That single glimpse of metal had transformed the whispers around them, lending them new urgency. This man was not what he pretended to be. Whatever game he played carried stakes higher than she could comprehend. They continued through the village in tense silence, passing the blacksmith's forge where hammers suddenly stilled, past the chapel where the priest crossed himself surreptitiously, until they reached the village's edge where modest hovels gave way to open countryside. Only then did he speak again. "What is your name?" he asked, turning toward her for the first time since the auction. The question struck her like a physical blow. How long had it been since anyone had asked her name, had cared enough to wonder who she was? "Elena," she whispered, the sound strange on her lips after so many months of being addressed only as girl or wench or worse. "Elena," he repeated, as if testing the truth of it. "We cannot linger here." He gestured toward a narrow path leading away from the main road, toward a copse of ancient oaks. "They're already talking, and talk travels faster than feet in these parts." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Following him into those trees meant trusting him with more than just her name. Every instinct screamed danger, yet what choice did she have? Return to the village that had sold her like a sack of grain? Her legs moved woodenly, following him down the path while her mind raced through scenarios of escape, should his intentions prove dark. The trees closed around them, dappled sunlight playing across the forest floor. Birds fell silent as they passed, adding to the unnatural tension building between her shoulder blades. The stranger moved with uncommon grace for his size, barely disturbing the undergrowth. Not a merchant's gait. Something else entirely. "The entire village is buzzing with theories by now," he said without turning back. "Some will say I'm an eccentric merchant. Others will whisper I'm a foreign nobleman with peculiar tastes. Neither serves us well." Us. The word hung in the air between them, implying a connection she couldn't comprehend. The girl, Elena, forced herself to speak. "Why did you do it? I'm not worth—" Her voice broke, unable to complete the thought. He stopped so suddenly she nearly collided with his back. When he turned, his hood shifted slightly, revealing a strong jaw tightened with emotion she couldn't name. "You will understand soon enough." They reached a small clearing where an old stable stood, long abandoned by whatever farm had once claimed this land. The wooden structure leaned precariously, its thatched roof partially collapsed. He gestured for her to enter first, and every muscle in her body tensed with renewed fear. "I won't harm you," he said, reading her hesitation. "But we must rest here before continuing our journey. The stable will hide us from passing eyes." Inside, the air hung thick with dust and the lingering scent of hay long rotted. Thin beams of light pierced through gaps in the walls, illuminating dancing motes in golden shafts. Elena's eyes struggled to adjust to the dimness after the bright day outside. When they did, she gasped. Tucked behind a broken stall partition lay a small leather trunk, its brass fittings gleaming incongruously in the dilapidated space. Beside it was a neatly folded pile of clothing, not the rough homespun of peasants, but fabric that caught the light with a subtle richness that made her fingers itch to touch it. The stranger removed his cloak, and Elena's world tilted sideways. The man standing before her was young, perhaps no more than 25 years, with the broad shoulders and straight posture of someone trained for command. His simple merchant's clothes couldn't disguise the athletic build beneath, and up close, his hands betrayed him utterly. No calluses of labor, but the precise strength of a man trained with weapons. "Who are you?" she whispered, backing against the stable wall. the rotten wood digging into her shoulder blades. He approached the trunk and knelt before it, his movements deliberate as if giving her time to adjust to each revelation. "Not what the village believes," he answered, unlocking the trunk with a small key produced from around his neck. "And neither are you what they believe." Elena's breath hitched in her throat as he lifted the trunk's heavy lid. Inside lay clothing of impossible quality, garments meant for nobility, not for a man who would wander through poor villages bidding at slave auctions. But what stole her breath entirely was what lay atop the folded garments, a finely crafted sword in an ornate scabbard, its hilt bearing a crest she didn't recognize but which radiated authority. "You're not a merchant," she managed, stating the obvious as her mind struggled to catch up with her eyes. "No." He lifted something from the trunk, a small velvet pouch. "And that is why we are both in danger now." He extended his hand, offering her the pouch. Elena hesitated, then reached out with trembling fingers. The velvet felt impossibly soft against her work-roughened skin. The pouch's weight surprised her, heavier than its small size suggested. "Open it," he instructed quietly. Inside was a medallion of silver and gold, intricately worked with symbols similar to those she had glimpsed on his bracer. But what made her knees weaken was the central design. A profile of a woman's face, hauntingly familiar though she couldn't place it. "This belongs to you," he said, his voice dropping lower. "It always has." Elena stared at the medallion, then at him, questions multiplying faster than she could form them into words. Who was the woman on the medallion? How could something so valuable belong to a girl sold at auction for mockery? And most importantly, who was this man who had appeared from nowhere to claim her with a king's ransom? Before she could voice any of these questions, the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the silence. Many horses, moving quickly. The stranger's expression hardened as he moved to the stable's cracked door, peering through. "They found us sooner than I expected," he muttered, returning to the trunk and drawing out the sword with practiced ease. "We have less time than I hoped to explain." The horseman's approach turned Elena's blood to ice. Each thundering hoofbeat matched her racing heart as the stranger extinguished the single lantern with a swift, practiced motion. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by thin shafts of light piercing through the stable's decaying walls. The medallion in her palm suddenly felt like a burning coal, a weight of unknown significance that might cost them both their lives. "Press against the back wall and don't move," he commanded, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more authority than a shout. Elena obeyed instinctively, her back sliding against rough-hewn timber that snagged the threadbare fabric of her dress. Splinters dug into her shoulder blades, but she welcomed the pain. It anchored her to reality when everything else had dissolved into a nightmare of confusion. The horses halted outside, and men's voices rumbled through the thin walls. Elena counted at least 5 distinct speakers, their tones measured and purposeful. Not village hunters, but men on a mission. Her stomach twisted into a knot so tight she fought the urge to double over. How had they been found so quickly? The medallion in her hand pulsed with unanswered questions. Sunlight suddenly flooded the stable's interior as the door was thrust open. Elena pressed herself deeper into the shadows, praying her ragged breathing wouldn't betray her. But the stranger, her unexpected savior, stepped forward into the light, deliberately placing himself between her and the doorway. With the sun at their backs, the silhouettes of 3 armed men darkened the threshold. "You've led us on quite a chase, sir," said the tallest figure, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "The village is abuzz with tales of a madman spending a fortune on damaged goods." The stranger's posture shifted subtly. Gone was any pretense of being a merchant or common traveler. The transformation stunned Elena. His spine straightened, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Despite his simple clothes, he suddenly emanated the unmistakable air of someone accustomed to giving orders rather than taking them. "I'm not who you think I am," he replied, each word deliberate and clear. "And I am certainly no madman." One of the men at the door chuckled, the sound like metal scraping stone. "We know exactly who you are. That's why we're here." As Elena's eyes adjusted to the contrasting light, she could make out details of the men, not common brigands, but soldiers in disguise. Beneath their travelers' cloaks gleamed hints of polished leather armor, Their hands rested on sword hilts with practiced ease. These were trained killers, not simple messengers. The stranger reached up slowly and pushed back his hood completely. Elena stifled a gasp. In the full light, his features were striking. A strong jawline marked by a thin scar that traced from ear to chin, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a nobility of bearing that couldn't be disguised by common clothes. But what shocked her most was his youth. He couldn't be more than 25 years old, yet he faced these armed men with the confidence of a seasoned warrior. "Not who I think you are." The leader of the armed men stepped into the stable, forcing the stranger to retreat a step closer to Elena. "You're the one playing dress-up, you're—" "Enough!" The stranger cut him off sharply. "I am not here on official business. This is a personal matter." The armed man's eyes flicked past him, finding Elena in the shadows. Personal indeed. The king would be fascinated to learn what kind of personal matters occupy your time these days. His gaze lingered on her with deliberate insult, and Elena felt herself shrink inward, shame burning her cheeks despite her innocence. The medallion in her palm suddenly felt heavier, its edges digging into her flesh. As if responding to her distress, the metal warmed against her skin, not unpleasantly, but noticeably. She glanced down and nearly cried out. In the dim light, the woman's profile seemed to have shifted slightly, the eyes now appearing to look directly at her instead of in profile. It had to be a trick of the light, yet her entire body tingled with a strange certainty that this object was more than mere metal. "She is not what you think," the stranger said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "She is under my protection." The leader barked a laugh. "Protection? Is that what they're calling it now? The court would be scandalized to learn their champion has such earthy tastes." Something dangerous flashed in the stranger's eyes. "I said enough." He shifted his stance subtly, a movement so slight Elena almost missed it. But the armed men tensed immediately, hands tightening on their weapons. "You're outnumbered," the leader warned. "Come quietly. Bring the girl if you must, though I can't promise her safe passage." The stable fell silent except for the creaking of leather as hands gripped sword hilts. Elena could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, feel sweat trickling between her shoulder blades despite the cool air. The medallion pulsed against her palm, its rhythm matching her racing heart. "I am not a merchant," the stranger said quietly, turning his head slightly so Elena could hear him clearly. His profile caught the dusty light, revealing a face both young and somehow ancient in its determination. "And I'm certainly not a slave trader." The leader of the armed men drew his sword with a metallic hiss. "Last chance, come peacefully or—" The stranger moved with blinding speed. In one fluid motion he kicked over the trunk, scattering its contents across the stable floor while simultaneously drawing his sword. The polished blade caught the sunlight, momentarily blinding the intruders. He lunged forward, not to attack, but to slam the stable door shut, plunging them all into partial darkness broken only by the thin beams of light penetrating the walls. Disoriented shouts filled the confined space. Elena pressed herself against the wall, the rough wood digging into her back as chaos erupted. The clash of metal on metal rang out, accompanied by grunts of effort and pain. Through gaps in the decaying walls, she could see the other two armed men circling around outside, seeking entrance. "Elena!" The stranger's voice cut through the confusion. "The back wall. Push the third post from the right." Her fingers fumbled in the darkness, counting the wooden posts until she found the third one. Unlike the others, it moved slightly under her touch. She pushed harder, and a section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a narrow passage behind the stable. "Go," he commanded, his sword meeting another with a shower of sparks that momentarily illuminated his face, focused, determined, and marked with a fresh cut across his cheek. She hesitated, clutching the medallion tightly. "I can't leave you. You must. I'll follow." He parried another blow, the force of it driving him back a step. Elena slipped through the opening into a cramped passage smelling of damp earth and rotting wood. Behind her, the sounds of combat intensified. She paused in the darkness, torn between self-preservation and an inexplicable loyalty to this stranger who had saved her from auction only to thrust her into greater danger. The passage ended abruptly at a small clearing behind the stable. Sunlight momentarily blinded her after the darkness. As her vision cleared, she saw two more armed men approaching from the forest edge, having circled the stable. They spotted her immediately. "There she is!" one shouted, breaking into a run. Elena clutched the medallion to her chest and turned to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The men would catch her in moments. As they closed in, the medallion suddenly grew hot against her skin, painfully so. She opened her palm to drop it, but froze at what she saw. The medallion was glowing with an inner light, the woman's profile now clearly visible, as if illuminated from within. A memory flashed through Elena's mind. A woman's face, kind eyes, a gentle hand brushing hair from her forehead. The sensation was so vivid it stole her breath. Not imagination, a memory buried so deep she hadn't known it existed. A crash from the stable snapped her back to the present. The stranger burst through the hidden door, blood streaming from the cut on his face. He took in the situation at a glance. Elena cornered, the armed men closing in. "Run!" he shouted, charging toward her pursuers with reckless courage. As steel met steel once more, Elena finally understood. This man wasn't fighting to capture her. He was fighting to free her. And somehow, impossibly, the medallion connected them both to a truth neither fully understood. The stranger dispatched one attacker with brutal efficiency, but the second landed a glancing blow to his arm. He staggered, and Elena saw his strength flagging. Without thinking, she picked up a fallen branch and rushed forward, swinging wildly at the attacker's head. The man turned in surprise, giving the stranger the opening he needed to drive his sword home. As the attacker fell, the stranger grabbed Elena's arm. "We have minutes at most," he gasped, blood soaking his sleeve. "The others will have heard." "You're wounded," she said, the reality of violence sinking in as she stared at the fallen men. "It doesn't matter." He pulled her toward the trees. "What matters is keeping you alive long enough to learn the truth." "What truth?" she demanded, her voice breaking with fear and confusion. In the filtered forest light, he turned to face her fully for the first time. His eyes met hers with an intensity that pinned her in place. "The truth about who you really are, and why men are willing to kill to keep that secret buried." Water dripped relentlessly from the cave ceiling, each drop striking the stone floor with a hollow echo that hammered against Elena's frayed nerves. The sound merged with her pulse, creating a disorienting rhythm that made her dizzy. They had fled through the forest for hours, the stranger pushing them forward despite his bleeding arm, until twilight made the woods a maze of shadows. When he'd finally pulled her into this hidden grotto behind a curtain of moss and vines, Elena's legs had simply given out, sending her crashing to the damp stone floor. Now they sat in near darkness, the only light coming from a small fire he'd reluctantly allowed. The flames cast grotesque, dancing shadows across the cave walls, faces that seemed to watch, judge, and whisper secrets she couldn't quite hear. Elena hugged her knees to her chest, her body trembling not just from the cave's chill, but from the weight of unspoken truths hovering in the air between them. "You killed those men," she whispered, the words scraping her throat like shards of glass. It wasn't a question. The image of steel sliding through flesh replayed behind her eyelids each time she blinked, a horror she couldn't unsee. The stranger sat opposite her, his features transformed by the flickering firelight into something ancient and otherworldly. Blood had dried on his cheek in a rusty streak, and he winced as he tightened a makeshift bandage around his wounded arm. His sword lay across his lap, still stained despite his attempts to clean it. "I am not a killer by nature," he said finally, his voice low and strained. "But those men would have taken you back to people who would rather see you dead than free." He looked up, meeting her gaze across the flames. "I made a promise to protect you, and I intend to keep it." "A promise to whom?" Elena demanded, her fingers unconsciously finding the medallion hidden in the folds of her tattered dress. The metal remained unnaturally warm against her skin, as if alive with its own heat. He studied her for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. The muscles in his jaw tightened, then relaxed as he came to a decision. "My name is Darian," he said, the admission seeming to cost him something. "And I am not a merchant." A bitter laugh escaped Elena's lips. "That much I gathered when you slaughtered 5 armed men with a sword no peddler could afford." The harshness in her voice surprised her. This man had saved her, had been wounded defending her. Yet anger bubbled up from some deep well inside her, directed not at him, but at a world where everything she thought she knew was crumbling away. Darian leaned forward, the firelight catching in his eyes. "I am the Crown Prince of Aldermere, the kingdom that borders these lands." The words struck Elena like a physical blow. Her lungs seized, refusing to draw breath. A prince? She had been purchased, defended, and spirited away by royalty? The absurdity of it threatened what little remained of her sanity. She had spent the morning as human chattel to be auctioned for mockery, and now sat across a fire from a man who claimed to rule a nation. "That's impossible," she managed finally, her voice barely audible over the dripping water. "Why would a prince disguise himself to buy a village girl at auction? Why risk your life? It makes no sense." "Because you are not who you believe yourself to be." Darian's voice softened, but his gaze remained intense, watching her reaction. "There is blood in your veins that changes everything." The medallion seemed to pulse against Elena's palm, as if responding to his words. A memory flashed, a fragment so brief she couldn't grasp it fully. A woman's hands, elegant and soft, placing the medallion around a child's neck. Her child's neck. Elena's neck. "What do you know of your parents?" Darian asked quietly. Elena swallowed hard, her throat suddenly parched. "Nothing. I was abandoned as an infant. The village headman's wife took me in out of charity, but when she died 2 winters ago," she trailed off, the familiar ache of loss mingling with newer, sharper pains. "Her son sold me to cover his gambling debts." Darian's expression darkened. "You were not abandoned. You were hidden." Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, a mournful sound that seemed to carry voices from the past. Elena felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling, exposing raw nerves she hadn't known existed. Hidden from what? From those who would use you or destroy you. Darian set his sword aside and reached into his tunic, withdrawing a folded piece of parchment. He hesitated, then extended it toward her. "This is why I sought you." Elena took the parchment with trembling fingers. It was fine vellum, the kind used for royal decrees and noble correspondence, nothing a commoner would ever touch. As she unfolded it, the smell of old ink and expensive oils reached her nostrils. The handwriting was delicate, flowing. A woman's hand. "I cannot read," she admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. Education was not a luxury afforded to village orphans. Something softened in Darian's expression. He moved around the fire to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the metallic tang of blood mingling with leather and sweat. "It is a letter," he said, "written by Lady Margareth of House Valerian 17 years ago. Your mother." The word mother struck Elena like a blade between her ribs. She had spent years imagining the woman who had cast her aside, sometimes hating her, sometimes longing for her. To hear this stranger speak of her as a known entity, as someone with a name and a noble house, made her chest constrict painfully. "My mother was a lady?" Her voice emerged small and childlike. "Not just any lady." Darian's finger traced lines on the parchment she couldn't decipher. "Lady Margareth was sister to King Edmund of Aldermere, my father's brother. She was my aunt." The implications crashed over Elena in a suffocating wave. "That would make me my cousin," Darian finished. "And a princess by blood, though one the world was never meant to know existed." Elena's head spun. The filthy, despised village girl, royal blood? It was too fantastic, too cruel a joke. Yet the medallion seemed to burn against her skin now, as if confirming this impossible truth. Why? The single word encompassed a universe of questions. Why was she hidden? Why was she left to suffer? Why had he come for her now? Darian's expression grew grave. "Your mother was betrothed to Lord Herrick of the Eastern Marches, a political alliance my uncle arranged. But she loved another, a man of common birth who served as captain of the palace guard." His voice lowered. "They married in secret against royal decree. When you were born, it threatened to unravel alliances that had kept peace for generations." Elena stared into the fire, watching orange flames devour the wood. Like those flames, anger began to consume her from within. So I was discarded to protect political convenience. No. Darian's hand closed over hers, his touch startling her with its unexpected gentleness. You were hidden to protect your life. Lord Herrick is a dangerous man who considers your very existence an insult to his honor. When he discovered the truth, your parents fled with you. They planned to raise you in secrecy, but... He paused, pain flickering across his features. Their carriage was ambushed on the mountain pass. It was believed all three of you perished. Another memory surfaced. Screams, the crack of splitting wood, the sensation of being passed from warm arms into strange ones, the smell of smoke and blood. Elena's breath came in short, painful gasps as fragmented images assaulted her mind. Only recently did I discover evidence suggesting a child might have survived. Darian continued. I've spent months searching village by village, following rumors of a girl with Valyrian features who appeared suddenly in a remote village 17 years ago. The cave suddenly seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing inward. Elena sprang to her feet, needing distance, air, escape from truths too heavy to bear. This is madness, she whispered, backing toward the cave entrance. I'm nobody, a village girl, unwanted, unloved. Darian rose too, his movement hampered by his injury. Elena, no! She pressed her hands against her temples, as if she could physically hold her fracturing world together. Even if what you say is true, even if I have this blood, what does it matter? I'm still the same worthless girl who was auctioned like cattle this morning. It matters, Darian said, his voice gaining intensity, because Lord Herrick now serves as my father's closest advisor. He whispers poison in the king's ear daily. The kingdom teeters on the brink of civil war, and you may be the key to preventing it. Elena felt her back hit the damp cave wall. There was nowhere left to retreat. How could I possibly matter to a kingdom's fate? Darian stepped closer, his face illuminated by the dying fire. Because you are living proof of Herrick's dishonor. Because with you alive, his claim to the eastern marches can be challenged. Because you represent a truth that could topple a tyrant. His voice dropped to a whisper. And because you are the last of your bloodline, the last hope for justice. The weight of his words crushed the air from Elena's lungs. She wasn't just a girl with noble blood. She was a weapon, a symbol, a pawn in a game of power she couldn't comprehend. The medallion burned against her skin like a brand, marking her for a destiny she had never asked for. I didn't want this, she whispered, tears finally breaking free to trace hot paths down her dirt-streaked face. Any of this. I know. Something in Darian's voice made her look up. In his eyes she saw not the calculating gaze of a prince using her for political advantage, but genuine compassion, and something deeper, a shared burden. Neither did I. But we don't choose the blood that flows in our veins, Elena. We only choose what to do with the life that blood gives us. As their gazes locked across the flickering shadows, a new question formed in Elena's mind, one more terrifying than any that had come before. If she accepted this truth, if she stepped into this new identity, how many more lives would be sacrificed in her name? Dawn broke like a wound across the eastern sky, bleeding crimson light into the dense forest as Darian led Elena deeper into unfamiliar territory. Each step drove slivers of pain through her bare feet, yet Elena welcomed the physical discomfort. It distracted her from the suffocating weight of revelations that threatened to crush her spirit. Noble blood, royal cousin, hidden princess. The words echoed in her mind like foreign incantations, meaningless, yet terrifying in their power. Darian moved with the confidence of someone following a predetermined path, though Elena could discern no trail among the gnarled roots and thick underbrush. His wounded arm had stiffened overnight, yet he refused to slow their pace, constantly scanning their surroundings with the hypervigilance of prey that knows it's being hunted. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath around them. Birds fell silent as they passed, and even the wind died to an eerie whisper through leaves that hung too still in the morning air. "Where are you taking me?" Elena finally asked, her voice sounding strange and hollow in her own ears. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the cave before first light. the shock of Darian's revelations having rendered her mute with a confusion that bordered on grief. What does one mourn when discovering that a life of misery was built on lies? To someone who can confirm what I've told you, Darian answered without breaking stride. Someone who knew your mother intimately, and who has kept secrets that could burn kingdoms to ash. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air slithered down Elena's spine. The medallion hung heavy against her chest, hidden beneath her tattered dress, its persistent warmth a constant reminder of impossible truths. Her fingers found it reflexively, tracing the profile of the woman whose blood supposedly ran in her veins. The microtension materialized like a phantom between her shoulder blades, the uncanny sensation of being watched that couldn't be dismissed as mere paranoia. Elena glanced over her shoulder, seeing nothing but dense forest, yet the feeling intensified. Something moved in her peripheral vision, perhaps just a branch swaying, perhaps something more. Her heart stuttered in her chest. "Darian," she whispered urgently. "I think we're being followed," he finished, his voice dropping to a barely audible murmur. "I know. They've been tracking us since we left the cave. Don't look back again." Cold sweat beaded on Elena's forehead despite the chill. "How many?" "At least 3, maybe more." His hand shifted to rest on his sword hilt. "But we're close now. Very close." The forest began to thin, ancient trees giving way to younger growth. Through gaps in the canopy, Elena glimpsed a structure nestled against a rocky hillside. A small stone building with a thatched roof, smoke rising from a crooked chimney. Not a peasant's hut, but not a noble dwelling either. Something in between, modest yet solid, hidden yet permanent. As they approached, the scent of herbs and wood smoke mingled with something sharper, a medicinal smell that stung Elena's nostrils. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman whose age was impossible to determine. She might have been 50 or 70. Her face bore the weathered lines of hard experience, yet her eyes held the alertness of youth. Silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a severe braid, and she wore the simple garb of a healing woman, pouches and vials hanging from a leather belt at her waist. "You bring trouble to my door, Prince Darian," the woman said without preamble, her gaze flickering past them to the forest. "And death follows close behind." "We had no choice, Abbess Marin," Darian replied. "I found her, just as your vision foretold." The woman's, Abbess Marin's, sharp eyes cut to Elena, narrowing as they took in every detail of her appearance. The scrutiny made Elena's skin crawl with self-consciousness. She was filthy, dressed in rags, her hair a tangled mess. Nothing like what a princess should be, nothing that would suggest noble blood flowed beneath her dirt-encrusted skin. "Inside," the abbess commanded, stepping back from the doorway. "Quickly." They entered a single room dominated by a large central hearth. Bundles of drying herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with pungent aromas. Tables lined the walls, crowded with mortar and pestles, glass vials, and ancient-looking manuscripts. The space should have felt cluttered, but instead radiated a sense of meticulous order, each item precisely where it needed to be. The abbess bolted the door behind them and moved swiftly to the windows, drawing heavy shutters closed. "They'll be here within the hour," she said matter-of-factly, lighting additional lamps to compensate for the lost daylight. "Herrick's men are nothing if not persistent." Elena's breath caught at the name. Lord Herrick, the man Darian had named as her mother's spurned betrothed, the dangerous noble whose honor had been wounded by her very existence, the man who might have orchestrated her parents' deaths. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably. "She doesn't believe me," Darian said to the abbess, his voice tight with urgency. Show her the proof." The old woman's gaze sharpened on Elena once more, this time lingering on her face with unsettling intensity. "She has her mother's eyes," she murmured, almost to herself. "Margaret's eyes always gave her away, too expressive for court politics, too honest." She gestured toward a chair. "Sit, child. What I have to show you cannot be seen while standing, lest the shock take your legs from under you." Elena obeyed automatically, her body responding to the command while her mind reeled. The abbess moved to a small chest tucked beneath one of the work tables, extracting a key from within her robes. The lock yielded with a heavy click that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. "I was not always an abbess," Merrin said as she searched through the chest's contents. "Once I served as lady's maid to the Princess Margaret of House Valerian. I dressed her hair for her first court appearance. I prepared her wedding gown when she married in secret. I delivered you into this world with these hands." She looked up, holding Elena's gaze. "And I helped her hide you when Herrick discovered the truth." Elena's throat constricted, cutting off her breath. The medallion against her chest seemed to pulse in response to the woman's words, growing warmer with each passing moment. "You have the medallion," the abbess stated, not a question, but a certainty. "May I see it?" With trembling fingers, Elena withdrew the silver disc from within her dress. The metal caught the lamplight, the woman's profile seeming to shift and change with the flickering illumination. The abbess inhaled sharply, her composure cracking for the first time. "Margaret wore this every day of her adult life," she whispered, reaching out but stopping just short of touching it. "She placed it around your neck the day we fled the palace. So she will always know who she is," she told me. "So she will remember, even if I cannot be there to tell her." From the chest, the abbess withdrew a bundle of fabric, fine silk, once vibrant blue but now faded with age. As she unwrapped it, Elena caught her breath. Inside lay a small portrait in an ornate silver frame, the paint still vivid despite the years. A woman gazed out from the canvas, her features delicate yet determined, her eyes, Elena's eyes, looking directly at the viewer with an expression of gentle defiance. "Your mother," Merrin said simply, placing the portrait in Elena's hands. The resemblance struck Elena like a physical blow. The same high cheekbones, the same curve of lip, the same slight asymmetry to the eyes that Elena had glimpsed in her own reflection in still water. But beyond the physical similarity lay something more profound, a sense of recognition so deep it transcended memory, reaching into the marrow of her bones where blood and history intertwined. "There are records," the abbess continued, pulling aged parchments from the chest. "Birth documents I hid, letters your mother wrote in the months before your birth, the marriage certificate binding her to Captain Rhys Alderley rather than Lord Herrick." She spread them on the table before Elena. "The evidence of your lineage, and the reason Herrick has spent 17 years trying to erase all trace of your existence." Elena stared at the documents, the elegant script swimming before her eyes. Though she couldn't read the words, the official seals and signatures spoke of legitimacy that couldn't be denied. The room seemed to spin around her, reality shifting on its axis. "If what you say is true," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "then my entire life has been a necessary deception," Merrin finished, her tone softening with compassion. "Your mother loved you enough to give you up, child. She chose your life over having you at her side." Tears Elena hadn't realized she was holding back spilled down her cheeks, carving clean paths through the dirt of their journey. The hollow ache that had lived in her chest for as long as she could remember, the emptiness of being unwanted, abandoned, transformed into something else. Something equally painful but fundamentally different. The grief of having been loved and lost. A sharp sound from outside snapped the moment like brittle glass. Darian moved to the window, carefully peering through a crack in the shutters. "Riders," he confirmed grimly. "At least 6. Herrick's men found us faster than expected." The abbess moved with surprising speed for her age, gathering the documents and returning them to the chest. "There's no time for more explanations. They cannot find these papers. Or you." She turned to Elena, gripping her shoulders with surprising strength. "You must decide now, child. Accept who you are and fight for your birthright, or continue hiding in shadows. Either way, your existence threatens everything Herrick has built on lies." Elena clutched the portrait of her mother, her mind racing. "But what can I possibly do? I'm just a—" "You are the rightful heir to the Eastern Marches," Darian cut in, his voice hard with urgency. "And with you alive, Herrick's claim to your mother's lands is void. That makes you either the most dangerous person in the kingdom, or its greatest hope." Outside, horses snorted and men's voices called commands. Heavy footsteps approached the door. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The portrait in her hand seemed to burn with accusation. Her mother had died to protect her, had sacrificed everything to give her a chance at life. What would she do with that sacrifice? The abbess pressed something cold and heavy into Elena's palm. A key. "There's a tunnel beneath the hearthstone," she whispered. "It will lead you to safety. Go now, while I delay them." "What about you?" Elena asked, suddenly afraid for this stern woman who represented her only link to a mother she couldn't remember. The old woman's lips curved in a grim smile. "I've kept your secret for 17 years, child. I won't break now." As pounding began at the door, Elena faced a choice that would determine not just her fate, but the future of a kingdom she'd never known was hers to claim. 3 weeks had passed since their escape through the abbess's hidden tunnel, yet Elena still woke each night clawing at phantom hands around her throat. The nightmare always ended the same way. The abbess's face, pale and still, eyes open, but seeing nothing. Elena had no way of knowing if the old woman had survived Herrick's men, but the absence of certainty had become its own kind of torture. Every shadow held the possibility of pursuit. Every stranger's glance might conceal recognition. Darian had brought her to a monastery perched on a cliff overlooking the borderlands, a place of stone and silence where time seemed suspended between heartbeats. The monks asked no questions, their vows of silence extending to the secrets of those who sought sanctuary within their walls. Elena had been given a small chamber with a narrow window facing east, where each morning the rising sun illuminated a world she now viewed through the distorting lens of her newfound identity. Her fingers traced the rough stone sill as she stared at the distant horizon. The borrowed novice's robe scratched against her skin, a constant reminder that nothing truly belonged to her, not her clothes, not her name, not even the memories that formed the foundation of her existence. Princess or pauper, she remained a ghost drifting between realities, substantial in neither. A soft knock at her door made her flinch. Even here, unexpected sounds triggered a surge of adrenaline that left her hands trembling and her mouth dry. "Enter," she called, hating the quaver in her voice. Darian stepped into the room, his princely disguise discarded for the simple attire of a pilgrim. Weeks of hiding had left shadows beneath his eyes and a new tension in his jaw. He carried a small wooden tray bearing bread and cheese, their ritual morning meal together, where they spoke of plans and possibilities while carefully avoiding the subject of failures and fears. "You haven't slept," he observed, setting the tray on the room's small table. "Neither have you," she countered, turning from the window. The morning light caught his profile, illuminating a fresh cut along his hairline, evidence of his nighttime excursions gathering intelligence from the surrounding villages. Elena had learned not to ask details of these missions. Some burdens were lighter when unshared. The micro-tension appeared in the subtle shift of Darian's posture as he arranged the food, a hesitation before breaking the bread, a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there the previous day. Elena felt her pulse quicken. He was hiding something. "What happened last night?" she asked directly, abandoning the pretense of ordinary conversation. 3 weeks of shared danger had stripped away courtly manners between them. Darian's fingers stilled on the loaf. "People are talking," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Not just peasants in taverns, but merchants, traveling nobles, even the monastery's suppliers." Cold dread pooled in Elena's stomach. "About me? About a girl rescued from auction by a mysterious benefactor? About Lord Herrick's men searching every village and hamlet for a fugitive of your description?" He met her eyes directly. "And about the resemblance between a certain scullery maid and the late Princess Margaret." Elena sank onto the edge of her bed, the coarse blanket rough beneath her palms. For weeks she had existed in a suspended state, her identity a secret held close between herself and Darian. The notion that strangers discussed her, speculated about her, searched for her. It made her feel exposed, as if the stone walls around her had suddenly turned to glass. "How?" she whispered. "We've been so careful." "Secrets this significant have a weight that cannot be contained," Darian said, breaking the bread with more force than necessary. "The abbess may have been questioned. Villagers who witnessed the auction would have talked. Herrick's men leave whispers in their wake like a ship's wake in still water. Elena closed her eyes, remembering the curious stares that had followed her yesterday in the monastery garden. Had she imagined the acolyte's lingering gaze, the way the herb master had paused in his work to watch her pass? Suspicion crawled across her skin like insects. Brother Thomas brought this at dawn, Darian said, withdrawing a folded parchment from within his tunic. It was left at the monastery gate during the night. Elena stared at the unmarked parchment as if it might burst into flames. What does it say? 3 words. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. We know everything. The room seemed to contract around her, the stone walls pressing inward. Elena fought to draw breath into suddenly constricted lungs. Herrick? Possibly. Or someone seeking to profit from your situation. Darian's hand moved unconsciously to the hilt of the dagger concealed beneath his simple robe. Either way, our time here is growing short. Your presence puts the monastery at risk. The weight of responsibility settled across Elena's shoulders like a physical burden. Every choice she made now affected others. The monks who had sheltered them, the abbess who had protected her mother's secrets, even Darian, whose royal status hadn't protected him from Herrick's blade. The medallion hung heavy against her chest, a constant reminder of bloodlines and obligations she had never asked to bear. What would you have me do? She asked, hating the note of helplessness in her voice. Hide in another monastery? Flee to another kingdom? Spend my life running from shadows? Something shifted in Darian's expression. A hardening of resolve, a decision reached after long internal debate. There is another option, he said carefully. One I've hesitated to suggest until now. Elena's skin prickled with foreboding. Tell me. We could stop hiding. He leaned forward, intensity blazing in his eyes. Claim your identity openly. Challenge Herrick's authority with the weight of your bloodline. A strangled laugh escaped her throat. Me? Challenge a powerful lord? I was sold at auction 3 weeks ago. I can't read. I don't know which fork to use at dinner. I'm no princess. I'm a fraud wearing a dead woman's face. You are Margaretta's daughter, Darian insisted, his voice gaining strength. The rightful heir to the Eastern Marches. Blood speaks louder than education, Elena. And you have something Herrick can never claim, legitimacy. The absurdity of it struck her like a physical blow. This man, this prince, believed she could step from the shadows of anonymity into the blinding light of royal politics. The faith in his eyes terrified her more than Herrick's hunters ever could. People would laugh, she whispered, voicing her deepest fear, just as they laughed at the auction block. Some would, Darian acknowledged, his honesty a strange comfort. Others would rally to your cause. The Eastern Marches have suffered under Herrick's rule. His cruelty is legendary, his taxes crushing. Many would welcome an alternative, especially one with Valyrian blood. Elena rose and paced the small chamber, the stone floor cold beneath her bare feet. The medallion seemed to grow warmer against her skin with each step, as if responding to the surge of conflicting emotions within her. And what happens if I fail? If Herrick's influence proves stronger than ancient bloodlines? Then we die, Darian said simply. As your parents did, as the abbess may have, as countless others who stood against tyranny. His bluntness should have frightened her, but instead Elena felt something unexpected unfurl within her chest, a flicker of anger that had nothing to do with fear. She thought of the abbess facing Herrick's men alone, of her mother placing the medallion around an infant's neck, of all the years spent believing herself worthless when royal blood had flowed through her veins. Even if I wanted to, she began slowly. How would we proceed? I have no army, no wealth, no supporters. You have me, Darian said, rising to stand before her, and through me, access to those who remain loyal to your mother's memory. There are nobles who resent Herrick's influence over my father, military commanders who remember serving under your father, common folk who whisper stories of Princess Margaret's tragic fate. Hope was a dangerous emotion, more treacherous than fear, more painful than despair. Elena had learned early to guard against its seductive promise, yet now it flickered within her like a flame catching dry tinder. And what of your position? She asked. You risk everything by supporting me. A shadow crossed Darian's face. My father grows weaker each day, his mind clouded by whatever poison Herrick drips in his ear. The kingdom I am meant to inherit crumbles while I watch from the shadows. Your claim isn't just about justice for your parents, it's about saving Aldermere itself. The weight of his words hung in the chamber's still air. Outside, monastery bells began to toll, their solemn resonance vibrating through stone walls. Elena closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. For 17 years she had been nothing, a discarded child, a burden, human chattel. The notion of becoming something more, someone who mattered, was simultaneously terrifying and intoxicating. If I agree, she said finally, opening her eyes to meet his gaze, I need to know one thing. Why did you really come for me? Not the political reason, not the strategic advantage. The truth? Darian held her gaze, something vulnerable flickering behind his carefully maintained composure. Because I made a promise, he said softly, to your mother as she lay dying in my arms. I was 14, sent to deliver a message to the border garrison. I found their carriage instead, ambushed on the mountain pass. Your father was already gone. Your mother lived just long enough to tell me about the child who had been spirited away. Find her, she whispered. Protect her. Her last words. Elena's throat constricted around a sob she refused to release. The revelation transformed everything. Darian's determination, his willingness to risk his position, his life. Not political calculation, but a deathbed vow had brought him to that auction block. I won't hide anymore, she said, the words emerging stronger than she expected. But neither will I be a puppet for those who see me only as a tool against Herrick. If I claim my mother's title, I do it on my terms. Something like respect flickered across Darian's features. What are your terms? Before Elena could answer, hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. A sharp rap at the door was followed immediately by its opening, revealing Brother Thomas's ashen face. Riders approaching, the monk gasped, breaking his vow of silence in his urgency. A dozen men bearing Lord Herrick's crest. They demand to search the monastery. Darian moved with practiced efficiency, gathering their few possessions. How much time? Minutes only, Brother Thomas whispered. The abbot tries to delay them, but they threaten to burn the monastery if you're not surrendered. More lives at risk, more innocents endangered by her very existence. Elena felt her resolve harden into something sharp and dangerous. No, she said, her voice cutting through Darian's hasty preparations. I won't run anymore. Both men turned to her in shock. Elena, Darian began. They want the lost princess? She straightened her spine, chin lifting in an unconscious echo of the portrait she'd seen in the abbess's cottage. Then let them face her. The iron taste of fear coated Elena's tongue as she stood at the monastery's massive oak doors, her borrowed novice robe exchanged for the simplest dress the monks could provide. The rough-spun fabric scratched against her skin, a tangible reminder of the chasm between who she had been and who she now claimed to be. Her bare feet were planted on cold stone, yet she felt as if she stood on the edge of a precipice with nothing but air beneath her. One step forward would either reveal wings she never knew she possessed, or send her plummeting to her death. This is madness, Darian hissed beside her, his knuckles white around his sword hilt. They'll kill you where you stand. Elena didn't turn to look at him. She kept her gaze fixed on the doors, beyond which waited men who had likely participated in her parents' murder. Perhaps, she acknowledged, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. But I would rather die standing as Margaretta's daughter than live forever running as no one. The abbot, a wizened man with eyes that had witnessed too many of humanity's darkest moments, studied her face with unsettling intensity. Your mother had that same look, he said quietly, when she defied her brother the king to marry for love rather than politics. A tremor passed through Elena's body at the unexpected connection to a woman she had never truly known. The medallion pulsed against her skin, warm and insistent, like a second heartbeat. Her fingers found it automatically, drawing strength from its solid weight. The microtension materialized in the subtle shift of air currents as the great doors began to open, a whisper of movement that sent primal warning signals racing along Elena's spine. Bright sunlight spilled across the monastery's threshold, momentarily blinding her. The scent of horses, leather, and metal-polished armor flooded the entrance hall. The smell of power, of authority, of threat. A man stepped forward, silhouetted against the light. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. His surcoat bore the emblem of a black hawk on crimson, Lord Herrick's personal guard, not common soldiers. As he removed his helmet, Elena's breath caught in her throat. His face was handsome in a hard way, all sharp angles and cold calculation. But it was his eyes that held her transfixed, pale blue, almost colorless, devoid of warmth or mercy. "We seek fugitives," he announced, his voice carrying the precise diction of nobility despite his soldier's attire. "A girl of common birth and a traitor to the crown who abducted her." The abbot stepped forward, his frail body somehow imposing in its dignity. "This is a house of God, Captain. We shelter only those who seek spiritual guidance." The captain's gaze swept past the abbot, finding Elena where she stood partially obscured by shadow. Something flickered in those pale eyes. Recognition, confusion, calculation. He took a single step toward her, hand dropping to his sword hilt. "You," he said, voice lowering. "Step forward." Elena felt Darian tense beside her, ready to draw his blade at the slightest provocation. She placed a restraining hand on his arm. This moment required courage, not bloodshed, at least not yet. She stepped into the light, lifting her chin with a defiance she didn't entirely feel. "I am Elena," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the entrance hall. "Daughter of Princess Margarethe of House Valerian and Captain Rhys Alderley of the Royal Guard." The declaration hung in the air like a thunderclap before the storm. Behind the captain, his men shifted uneasily, exchanging glances laden with shock and disbelief. None had expected such a direct claim. They had come hunting a frightened girl, not confronting a princess declaring her lineage. The captain's face hardened into a mask of controlled fury. "Margaret's child died 17 years ago in the mountain ambush," he stated flatly. "You are nothing but an impostor trading on tragic history." "Am I?" Elena reached for the medallion, drawing it out from beneath her dress. The silver caught the sunlight, the woman's profile seemingly coming alive with the play of light across its surface. "This belonged to my mother. She placed it around my neck the day we fled the palace, the day your master sent men to kill us." A muscle twitched in the captain's jaw, his gaze fixed on the medallion with an intensity that betrayed recognition. "A trinket easily stolen or forged," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his tone. "Just as the Eastern Marches were stolen by Lord Herrick," Elena countered, taking another step forward. "Lands that rightfully belong to my mother's line." "To me?" The captain's hand closed around his sword hilt, but he did not draw. "Careful, girl. Such accusations against a peer of the realm constitute treason." "Truth cannot be treason," Elena replied, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might burst from her chest. "Lord Herrick claimed the Eastern Marches through fraud and murder. He orchestrated the attack that killed my parents. He has spent 17 years hunting me to eliminate the last legitimate threat to his position." The monastery hall had fallen deathly silent. Even the monks who had gathered to witness the confrontation stood frozen, scarcely breathing. Outside, birds had ceased their calls, as if nature itself paused to witness this moment of reckoning. "You have no proof," the captain said, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. "Don't I?" Elena felt something shift within her, a certainty born not of knowledge, but of blood memory, of truths carried in flesh and bone rather than conscious thought. "The Abbess Marin preserved proof of my birth, of my mother's lawful marriage. Documents that would destroy Lord Herrick if presented to the king." The captain's expression darkened. "The old woman is dead." Ice flooded Elena's veins. Though she had suspected the abbess's fate, hearing it confirmed struck like a physical blow. Another death laid at her feet, another sacrifice made in her name. She swallowed hard against the surge of grief threatening to overwhelm her. "Her death changes nothing," she said, forcing steel into her voice. The truth survives her, as do I. The captain's patience snapped. He drew his sword with a metallic hiss that echoed through the hall. Enough of this farce. By order of Lord Herrick, advisor to King Edmund of Aldermere, I place you under arrest for false claims to noble birth and conspiracy against the crown. Darian stepped forward, his own blade drawn. She stands under my protection, Captain. Would you strike down the Crown Prince to serve Herrick's ambition? The revelation sent shock rippling through the guards. Many had not recognized Darian in his simple attire, but now they saw what should have been obvious: the royal bearing, the distinctive features of House Aldermere. The captain faltered, caught between conflicting loyalties. Your Highness, he managed, lowering his sword slightly. Your father believes you kidnapped or dead. Lord Herrick has organized searches throughout the kingdom. I'm certain he has, Darian replied coldly. Just as he organized the ambush that killed Elena's parents. Just as he has poisoned my father's mind against any who oppose his influence. The captain's gaze darted between Elena and Darian, calculation evident in every line of his face. Elena could almost see the thoughts racing behind those pale eyes, weighing risks, measuring advantages, determining where true power lay. This man was no mere soldier. He was Herrick's creature, bound by ambition as much as duty. Your Highness, the captain said, his tone softening to something almost reasonable. Come with us to the capital. Bring the girl if you must. Present your case to the king himself. If what you claim is true, justice will prevail. The offer hung in the air, seductive in its apparent reasonableness. Elena glanced at Darian, seeing the momentary uncertainty in his eyes. Was this a genuine opportunity to resolve the conflict without further bloodshed, or a trap designed to deliver them both into Herrick's hands? The answer came not from Darian, but from the back of the guard formation. A soldier pushed forward, his face flushed with urgency. Captain, he said, voice pitched low but carrying in the hall's perfect acoustics. Lord Herrick's orders were explicit. Neither is to reach the capital alive. The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of shock spreading outward. The captain's expression transformed from diplomatic mask to murderous rage in an instant. He lunged forward, sword arcing toward Elena's unprotected chest. Time seemed to slow. Elena saw the blades approach with perfect clarity. The play of light along its edge, the subtle imperfections in the steel, the determination in the captain's eyes. Her body refused to move, frozen not by fear, but by a strange acceptance. This was always how it would end, with steel and blood, just as it had begun for her parents. The clash of metal on metal jolted her back to full awareness. Darian had intercepted the captain's blade with his own, the impact sending shockwaves through both men's arms. Run, he shouted to Elena, already engaging the captain in a deadly dance of steel and skill. The monastery erupted into chaos. Guards surged forward while monks scattered, seeking shelter from the violence defiling their sanctuary. Elena stood transfixed, watching as Darian fought with desperate intensity against a superior force. 1 against 12, impossible odds, a sacrifice he made willingly for her cause. A hand closed around her arm, pulling her back toward the inner chambers. This way, my lady, Brother Thomas urged, his vow of silence forgotten in the crisis. There's another passage. No. Elena pulled free of his grasp. I will not run again. I will not watch another die for me. The medallion burned against her skin, pulsing with an energy that seemed to flow through her entire body. Without conscious thought, Elena stepped forward into the fray, her voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected power. Enough, she commanded, and to her astonishment, the fighting paused. All eyes turned to her, some shocked, some calculating, all wary. Look at me, she continued, addressing the guards directly. Look closely. How many of you served House Valerian before the ambush? How many knew my mother? See her face in mine. Several of the older guards exchanged uneasy glances. One man in particular, graying at the temples with a scar bisecting his left cheek, stared at her with growing recognition. I knew the Princess Margaret, he said slowly. Served in her personal guard before. He faltered. Before Lord Herrick had her killed, Elena finished for him. before he claimed lands and titles that were never rightfully his, before he began whispering poison into King Edmund's ear, turning father against son, noble against noble. The scarred guard lowered his sword slightly. "There is a resemblance," he admitted, his loyalty visibly wavering. The captain saw the dangerous shift occurring among his men. "Enough," he roared, breaking away from Darien to advance on Elena. "She is nothing but a common-born pretender. Kill her now, or face Herrick's wrath." But his words fell on increasingly unreceptive ears. The seed of doubt had been planted, taking root in the fertile soil of men's memories. Elena felt power in this moment, not the power of weapons or armies, but of truth, long suppressed, finally breaking free. "I don't ask you to betray your oaths," she said, addressing the wavering guards. "I ask you to honor them, to the crown, to justice, to the memory of those who served House Valerian with honor. Help us reach the capital. Let the king himself judge the truth of my claim." The balance hung, precarious as a sword's edge, as the guards weighed duty against conscience, orders against honor. The captain sensed his control slipping away. With a cry of rage, he lunged at Elena, blade aimed at her heart. This time, it wasn't Darien who intercepted the blow. The scarred guard stepped between them, his sword meeting the captain's with a force that drove the younger man back. "I served Princess Margaret," the guard said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will not fail her daughter as I failed her." The monastery hall froze in shocked silence as captain and guard faced each other, former comrades now divided by a loyalty more profound than orders. The captain's face contorted with fury and betrayal. "Traitor," he spat, "Herrick will have your head." "Perhaps," the scarred guard acknowledged. "But I will face my death knowing I served honor at the last." He turned slightly, addressing his fellow guards without taking his eyes from the captain. "Choose now, brothers. Who among you will stand for the true blood of House Valerian?" The great hall of Lord Herrick's fortress smelled of blood and fear. Elena stood at its center, her wrists raw from the iron shackles that bound them, her body aching from the brutal journey that had brought her here. The scarred guard lay dead outside the monastery walls, along with 3 others who had chosen to stand with her. Their loyalty had bought her life, but not her freedom. In the chaotic aftermath, the captain had prevailed through sheer ruthlessness, cutting down his own men with mechanical efficiency before subduing both Elena and Darien. Now she faced the architect of her parents' murder, the man who had spent 17 years ensuring she remained lost. Lord Herrick sat upon a carved chair atop a stone dais, his posture deceptively relaxed, one leg casually crossed over the other. He was older than she had imagined, perhaps 50 years, with silver threading through his dark hair and deep lines etched around eyes that studied her with cold calculation. Not the raging monster of her imagination, but something far more dangerous. A patient predator who had waited nearly 2 decades to eliminate the final threat to his power. "So," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft, almost gentle, "the lost princess returns from the dead." His fingers tapped a rhythm against the chair's wooden arm. Not nervousness, Elena realized, but something like anticipation. The sound echoed in the cavernous space, marking time like the heartbeat of a dying animal. The micro-tension manifested in the subtle shift of Lord Herrick's gaze, a flickering assessment that moved from her face to the medallion still hanging around her neck, then to something beyond her left shoulder. Elena resisted the urge to turn and look. Whatever or whoever stood behind her represented a threat Herrick was measuring, calculating into his plans. Her scalp prickled with awareness of unseen danger, muscles tensing involuntarily against bonds she couldn't break. "Where is Prince Darien?" she demanded, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Fear still coursed through her veins like ice water, but it no longer controlled her. Somewhere during their journey to this fortress, terror had transformed into a cold clarity that sharpened rather than dulled her senses. Lord Herrick's lips curved in what might have been called a smile on any other face. On his, it resembled the expression of a wolf contemplating a wounded deer. "The prince is enjoying my hospitality in the North Tower. He'll remain there until his father's men arrive to escort him home. Assuming he survives his injuries, Elena's heart seized at the casual cruelty of the statement. Darian had fought like a demon when they were captured, taking wounds that would have killed a lesser man. The image of him bleeding, possibly dying alone in some dank cell, sent a surge of rage through her body so powerful it momentarily overshadowed her fear. "If he dies," she said, each word precise and measured, "you'll have murdered the heir to the throne. Even you cannot survive such treason." Something dangerous flickered in Herrick's eyes, a momentary crack in his composed facade. "Careful, girl. Your newfound courage is admirable but misplaced. Prince Darian's wounds are self-inflicted, the unfortunate result of his madness. My men merely defended themselves against a royal who had clearly lost his mind, abducting a common girl and filling her head with delusions of nobility." He rose from his chair with fluid grace that belied his age, descending the dais steps with measured stride. Each footfall against stone sent vibrations through the floor that Elena felt through the soles of her bare feet. He circled her slowly, a predator savoring the moment before the kill. "You do look like her," he admitted, pausing to study her profile. Margaret had that same stubborn set to her jaw, that same defiant tilt to her chin. "It's remarkable, really. Nature's cruel joke, giving a peasant the face of a princess." "Not nature's joke," Elena countered, turning to follow his movement. "Simply blood-speaking truth. I am Margaret's daughter, legitimate heir to the Eastern Marches, and you know it. Why else spend 17 years hunting a nameless orphan?" Herrick stopped his circling, his expression shifting subtly. Not anger, as she had expected, but something more complex, a mixture of calculation and what might almost be respect. "You've grown bolder since the auction block," he observed. "Tell me, what transformed the trembling village girl into this creature who dares speak to me as an equal?" The question hung in the air between them, layered with traps and hidden meanings. Elena felt something shift inside her, a certainty born not of knowledge but of blood memory, of truths carried in flesh and bone. "Not transformation," she answered. "Recognition. I finally understand what was taken from me, what you stole." "What I claimed," he corrected, his voice hardening. "After your mother rejected our betrothal for a common guard captain, bringing shame to both our houses. After she bore a child that should have been mine, with a bloodline that should have joined our houses." His composure slipped further, revealing the festering wound beneath decades of calculated ambition. "The Eastern Marches were promised to me through our marriage contract. When Margareta broke faith, I simply took what was rightfully mine by other means." "By murder," Elena said flatly. "By ambush on a mountain pass, by the slaughter of innocents." Herrick's face contorted briefly before smoothing back into its mask of control. "Politics," he countered, "require difficult decisions. Your parents chose their fate when they fled with you, when they threatened the stability of alliances that maintain peace across 5 kingdoms." He reached out suddenly, fingers closing around the medallion at her throat. Elena flinched but held her ground, refusing to cower, even as his knuckles brushed against her skin. The touch felt like a violation, his proximity triggering memories of helplessness that threatened to overwhelm her hard-won composure. "I recognize this," he said, studying the silver disc. "Margaret never removed it, even at court functions where it clashed with finer jewels." Sentimental fool. His grip tightened, the chain digging into the back of Elena's neck. "Do you know what this medallion truly represents? Not just a family heirloom, but the key to Valyrian lands, the physical symbol of inheritance passed from mother to daughter for 10 generations. Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise in Elena's mind. Not sentiment alone had driven her mother to place this medallion around an infant's neck before sending her into hiding. It was legitimacy made tangible, proof of birthright that no document alone could provide. "This is why you never stopped searching," she whispered, the pieces falling into place. "Without it, your claim to the Eastern Marches remains vulnerable, a theft rather than an inheritance." Herrick released the medallion abruptly, stepping back as if it had burned him. "Clever girl," he acknowledged, a new wariness entering his expression. "Too clever to leave alive, unfortunately. Though I admit, I'm curious. How did you survive the ambush? My men were thorough." The question unlocked fragments of memory that had haunted Elena's dreams. Screams, the crack of splitting wood, the sensation of being passed from warm arms to strange ones, the smell of smoke and blood. "I don't remember," she admitted. "I was an infant. Someone must have found me, taken pity." "Pity," Herrick repeated, the word dripping with contempt. "The great weakness of the common folk. They'll shelter any stray, no matter the danger it brings to their door." He turned away, walking back toward the dais. "It doesn't matter now. The story ends here, today." Fear clawed at Elena's throat, but she forced it down. "If you kill me, questions will remain. Darien knows the truth. Others may suspect." "Questions fade," Herrick replied, settling back into his chair. "Suspicions wither without proof. Prince Darien will be returned to his father, his mind addled by fever and wounds, his wild tales of lost princesses dismissed as delirium." He gestured toward the shadows behind the dais, where a figure now emerged, a man in the robes of a court physician, carrying a small wooden box. "And you, my dear, will have succumbed to the same madness that afflicted your mother in her final years." Elena's blood ran cold. "My mother wasn't mad. History remembers what power dictates it should remember," Herrick said, taking the box from the physician. "And I have spent 17 years ensuring that Princess Margaret is remembered as a tragic figure whose mind broke under the pressures of court life, who fled in paranoid delusion, taking her infant daughter to their deaths." He opened the box, removing a small crystal vial containing clear liquid. "The same affliction, it seems, has manifested in her daughter. Found wandering the countryside claiming royal blood, becoming increasingly violent when contradicted." Understanding crashed over Elena like a wave of ice water. Not a quick death by blade, but a slow dissolution of mind, a living death that would confirm the lies Herrick had spent years cultivating. The physician approached with measured steps, the vial now uncorked, its contents emitting a faint, sweet aroma that couldn't mask the undertone of something rotten. "Restrain her," Herrick commanded, and hands materialized from the shadows. Guards who had been present but unseen, waiting for this moment. Elena struggled against their grip, but her shackled wrists gave her no leverage. The physician drew closer, his face a mask of professional detachment. "Prince Darien will never believe this lie," Elena gasped, fighting with renewed desperation. "He knows the truth. He's seen the evidence." "Prince Darien," Herrick said calmly, "is currently receiving similar treatment for his own protection. By the time he returns to court, his memories of you will be confused at best. A sad delusion born of head injury and fever, nothing more." The physician stood before her now, vial raised to her lips. Elena clamped her mouth shut, twisting her head away. A guard's fingers dug into her jaw, forcing her face forward while another pinched her nose closed. Panic surged through her body as her lungs began to burn with the need for oxygen. She would have to breathe eventually, would have to open her mouth and accept whatever poison would erase her mind while leaving her body a hollow shell. In that moment of desperation, as darkness began to edge her vision, a commotion erupted at the hall's entrance. The great doors burst open with a crash that reverberated through the stone chamber. Guards shouted in alarm, and the hands restraining Elena loosened just enough for her to wrench away, gasping for air. Through watering eyes, she beheld a sight that seemed impossible. Darien, bloodied but upright, supported by the Abbess Marin, whose death had apparently been greatly exaggerated. Behind them stood a contingent of soldiers bearing the royal crest of Aldermere, not Herrick's hawk. "Lord Herrick," Darien called, his voice weak but carrying the unmistakable authority of royal command. "By order of King Edmund, you are relieved of your position and placed under arrest for treason against the crown." Herrick's face drained of color. "This is madness. The king would never—" "The king has seen the evidence," the abbess interrupted, her voice stronger than her frail appearance suggested. "Documents preserved these 17 years, Princess Margaretta's marriage certificate, the birth record of her legitimate daughter, and your own letters plotting their elimination." Elena felt her knees threaten to buckle as understanding dawned. The abbess hadn't died at Herrick's men's hands. She had escaped, taking with her the very evidence needed to expose his crimes. While Elena and Darien had drawn Herrick's attention through their flight and capture, Marin had traveled directly to the capital, to the king himself. Herrick's carefully constructed world collapsed around him in seconds. His own guards hesitated, uncertain where their loyalty should now lie as royal soldiers poured into the hall. The physician with his poison vial retreated into shadows, suddenly invisible as all attention focused on the confrontation at the hall's center. "Lies," Herrick hissed, though his voice had lost its confident edge. "Forgeries created by an old woman with a grudge. The king's archivists have confirmed their authenticity," Darien replied, "and I have added my own testimony as witness to your attempted murder of my royal cousin." Elena stood frozen between these colliding forces, Herrick's desperate denial and Darien's royal authority. The medallion at her throat seemed to pulse with warmth, as if responding to this moment of reckoning. 17 years of hidden truth finally exposed to light. Herrick's eyes darted around the hall, calculating, measuring, searching for escape. Finding none, his gaze settled on Elena with such hatred that she physically recoiled. In that moment, she saw what truly dwelled behind his mask of civility. Not calculated ambition, but obsessive rage, a festering wound that had poisoned him from within since the day her mother had rejected his suit. "If I cannot have what is rightfully mine," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper meant for her ears alone, "then neither shall the daughter of the woman who betrayed me." His hand moved with unexpected speed, drawing a dagger from within his robes. Before anyone could react, he lunged toward Elena, blade aimed at her heart. As the dust settles on this tale of identity, sacrifice, and the courage to reclaim what was stolen, we're left wondering, what defines our true worth? Is it the blood flowing through our veins, the titles we inherit, or the choices we make when facing impossible odds? Elena's journey from auction block to her rightful place reminds us that dignity isn't granted by others. It's claimed through our own courage to stand tall, even when the world conspires to keep us small. What would you do if you discovered your entire life had been built on carefully constructed lies? Would you have the strength to step into the light and declare your truth, knowing it might cost not only your life, but the lives of those who stand with you? Perhaps the greatest power we possess isn't found in crowns or titles, but in the moment we decide that living with purpose is worth more than surviving in shadows. If this story touched your heart or sparked something within you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth. Subscribe to the channel for more tales that explore the depths of human courage and the extraordinary power of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Like and comment below, not just for the algorithm, but to join a community of storytellers and dreamers who believe that the most compelling stories are the ones that remind us of our own capacity for transformation.